Welcome to this week's edition of Two Men in the Middle, where two men in the Midwest discuss politics, news, and current events. I'm Brandon Kinnig.
I'm Craig Ewing.
Craig, let's start with the controversy that just won't go away. Kristi Noem killing her dog. So the first detail to come out from her newly published book, which isn't making the waves that she hoped it would, followed by additional details that were strange, bizarre, and seemed to just defy the truth, essentially, regarding a visit to North Korea, meeting Kim Jong-un.
Brandon, you worked on, it was Roger Marshall, senator from Kansas.
No, Jerry Moran. I did not work for Roger Marshall.
I'm sorry.
Roger Marshall is an idiot. I did not work for him.
That's my bad.
Yes.
That's my bad. You worked for Senator Jerry Moran.
Jerry Moran, yeah.
Did Jerry Moran ever sneak into North Korea and have a little powwow with Kim Jong-un?
He did not. No.
Is that possible for someone even to do?
That is not. It is nearly impossible. It is very difficult and requires a lot of scheduling work just to get the president of the United States set up to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un. The last time that happened was with Trump. And before that, you'd have to go back probably to Clinton, I think. I mean, it doesn't happen often. And so a little known congresswoman from South Dakota having the opportunity to meet Kim Jong-un. I mean, how she didn't serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. She wasn't on, didn't have a national security or intelligence committee post. So there would be no reason for her to do so. And I guess what's most strange about this claim is her inability to just say, hey, call it whatever you want. I didn't recall it correctly. I got ahead of myself. The fact of the matter is that she wouldn't answer the question. So she was on Face the Nation and she was on CBS this morning. And her response was, I've met with many world leaders. And they kept asking her over and over again, but did you meet with Kim Jong-un? And she wouldn't answer that. She just said that part is being removed from the book. And then the same thing with going to North Korea. So if you do one of these congressional junkets and you go to South Korea, you meet with dignitaries, trade ambassadors, and representatives, and then they usually take you to the DMZ, the border with the North, and you do this thing where you meet the American and South Korean military contingent.
It's a pretty generic trip.
Very generic trip. You do this thing where you step right there over the border where the line is, where they have the officers post on either side. That's about it. It's not really visiting North Korea. You don't actually stay on the North Korean side for longer than like a second. It's not a visit. So by saying that she visited,
and Kim Jong-un isn't there like handing out pamphlets or things too. I mean,
he's not there
hanging out at
the
border. Okay,
no, he's not really looking to meet with members of Congress. So that's not a thing. And so it's beyond bizarre that she continues to just respond to this in such a cringeworthy way. I mean, she can't get ahead of this. It's bizarre. I mean, there's between that and the dog and the goat, and she also, little known, another thing she recounted was when Nikki Haley was a UN ambassador, calling her and offering to be a mentor for her, and saying that Nikki Haley felt threatened by her, which again is kind of bizarre. But if you are someone like Kristi Noem, who I feel like this whole book was intended to be her audition for VP, like I'm tough, I'm strong, I can kill a dog, I stared down Kim Jong-un, didn't happen. Of course you would say something like, you would spin maybe a logical story of Nikki Haley calling you and offering to help with something into Nikki Haley being threatened by you because you're a woman and she sees you like it. But it's stupid and ridiculous. And I mean, none of it, you have to question the entire book, I think, now, based on
I think so.
What we've heard.
Here's what also gets me is this is playing right in Trump's space. He came out the other day to rally and reinforce that he and Kim Jong-un are in love together. They write each other letters. I mean, the
love letters,
why is she trying to hoard in on Trump's boyfriend? That seems very...
Put herself in the middle of that, like a love triangle? It's like, come on.
Brandon, I come to you and say, against all advice and sanity, I'm going to make a run for president. One of the first things we would decide, and I'm going to hire you as my campaign manager. Don't get too excited. The job doesn't really pay much. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hire a ghostwriter and we're going to write a book. It's pretty standard. It's 101. It's an easy move to execute. It's been done hundreds of times as people enter into the political realm. The thing with these books are too, they're written by a ghostwriter. So I'm assuming you go through a series of interviews or you fill something out. Maybe you write the foreword maybe or something like that. But for the most part, this is a low effort project from the person who the book is about. Also, too, I've heard from many, many people who've written these things. There is no life-changing money behind these books. These are $75, $100, $200,000. I think somebody got like a $300,000 advance for a book or something, and people were bitching that's people who seriously write political books where, my God, that's a huge amount of money from a publisher.
They're mostly vanity projects.
They're vanity projects. So the first thing is with Kristi Noem is you failed to execute one of the easiest starts of a quest to get into a political campaign that most politicians seem to execute. That's number one for me. The second thing is you picked a topic that certainly would appear on Trump's radar. To me, that had to be purposeful. I mean, the inclusion of Kim Jong-un being this leader had to be something that she thought Trump would enjoy. And I always love, and this mostly happens to politicians, sometimes celebrities, but mostly politicians, when you get caught like this and you have to go on Kristi Noem, to her credit, she must have done 15 to 20 different spots over the last 2 days. I mean, she has been Newsmax, News Nation, OAN. She is going everywhere.
Fox Business. Yeah.
And what I really enjoy and what really makes me excited to see where Kristi Noem goes next is I love watching an adult try to explain what happened when the truth cannot be told. Kristi Noem's viewpoint in this is that from going on these media appearances is basically, I'm going to tell you a narrative that I think explains away sufficiently what was happening in the book. And I am never going to say the truth on this, which is just simply, hey, that one wasn't true. I was thinking of something else. I workshopped that in and I just left it in. There's 1,000 different lies you could tell to how that accidentally got into the book, but she won't go there. Is this the side effect of Trump? That one new rule with new politics under Trump is there is no apology. There is no backtrack. It's 100% forward. And I think Kristi thought those rules applied to her.
Right. She's taken a page from the Trump playbook and to not admit guilt, not to admit fault, never to apologize. So check. And then to pivot to calling out the media and to criticizing the media for daring to question her and to persistently question her. It's the lamestream media. They're out to get me. I play the victim card. I'm a victim. This is what happens when conservatives run for office, yada yada. I mean, so it's that
Kristi Noem. I'm sorry. Did she just make the miscalculation that Trump's rules applied to her too? She could say do whatever she wanted, and there'd be nobody would question it. And if they did, it would be a big deal.
Yes, and it's amazing that Republican politicians, particularly MAGA politicians, think they can just adopt Trump's behavior and style and conduct, but it doesn't work. It only works for Trump. They don't realize that they cannot get away with that. There is something unique to Trump and about his phenomenon that people really don't take him seriously. They even his supporters who just adore him, they allow him to get away with things that they would never allow other politicians to get away with. We've seen it time and time again. And, but yet they keep trying. They think that even by being close to Trump, adopting his rhetoric, that they can adopt his persona and basically his Teflon, and they can't.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot this week, and I think we've reached the point where certainly for Trump is just a caricature. What he says or does makes doesn't matter anymore. I listened to the podcast last week, Brandon, and you had a sense of desperation trying to plead with people to read this Time article and take it seriously. These are the words out of his mouth about what Trump is planning to do. Nobody is alarmed by that. I've seen no real stories on it. Nobody's covering it. I think
it got a half a day. That's it. Yeah. It was like a half a day coverage.
Trump has entered this point where he has been anointed the champion of the MAGA group, against the fill in the blank to whatever you want that group to be. And it doesn't really matter what he says or does. And I don't know how Trump got that special status. I'm not sure of what he's did. I don't know if he did anything to earn it, except by the fact that I am your fighter, and that is enough. But Kristi Noem doesn't occupy that space and had to know going into this that this was not going to work for her. I still find it a little bit, I would still believe a little conspiracy theory that she did this purposefully just to exit politics.
See, I don't think it's intentional. I just really think she's not that smart of a person. I think
I get that.
I think it really is unintentional. I think she has been kind of a backbencher when it's come to the Trump beefsteaks anyway. I mean, she's not like inner tier, like tier one. She's really kind of like pretty far down. But I think she was hoping that maybe this book would make a splash and propel her forward. And instead the opposite has happened. So I really don't think.
You think she's totally dead with VP? Even if Trump comes out and says, I will pick a woman, you think she's out?
Oh, I think she's out. Apparently, from what I've read with Trump World, he is just completely blown away by the fact that she would include that. He sees it as weakness, specifically the fact that she somehow allowed it to get into the book, and conferring with her consultants, ghostwriters, thought that she'd be fine. Because he basically, again, this is secondhand from what people around him have said. He sees it as a PR disaster and that she should have known better. And he's right on that account.
And she said it in her own voice. I mean, she recorded the audiobook. She said this. It's not like she gave an interview to a ghostwriter and then suddenly, somebody else recorded it. The book came out and she was completely dumbfounded by this.
No, so
I think we're both in agreement that Kristi Noem is done. This is her exit strategy. I'm assuming she's terming out as South Dakota governor.
I think that, I mean, this is her last term. I forget when she's up for re-election. She can only, have maybe 2 years. Did
she won a re-election, didn't she? Did she win re-elect?
I'm sorry, not up for re-election, but when her term is up.
Okay.
So she won in 22. So she'd be 26.
Okay. Yeah. So her term is up. And so in 2026, she has no other state path. She can't run for governor again. She's got to get into the federal game or something at that point.
Right. So, I think as she's looking at her next move. And I assume that if she didn't get the VP, she would get like some type of cabinet position. But that really looks to be in doubt now. Yeah.
This is a public service announcement to anybody that holds a high-level position, either in the government or corporate. When you are the person in power, when a crisis happens, more of you is rarely the answer because there's a high probability you created the problem in the first place. And that's where Kristi Noem is struggling. Her whole entire political career, more of Kristi Noem has always been the solution. Then now she's stuck in a cycle where, no, you're only making this worse. And I don't think she has a way out.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. No, I was going to say, like, she has, I mean, if you look at the trajectory of her career, she rose up and came to Congress as a Tea Party candidate back during the Tea Party wave. When that was the thing in 2010, and she served several terms in Congress, ran for governor, although the governor's race when she initially ran was close. She only won by, I think it was 51-48, so 4-point margin, and then expanded that when she was up for re-election, mostly in the wake of COVID, because she had declared South Dakota, a refuge, kind of like what DeSantis did in Florida, from mask mandates. And so she was really trying to build that brand. So what DeSantis was doing in Florida, she was trying to do in South Dakota and trying to outcompete DeSantis in many aspects.
Yeah. Isn't it really interesting that all of the governors who kind of made their bones on COVID and kind of their response to mask mandates and vaccine mandates and their response to the federal government, as soon as they've tried to step out of those roles and expand it, they've not had a really good time. DeSantis went down in flames. Kristi Noem, this is an epic collapse.
They had no
think of other governors that once that moment was over, they couldn't convert that into any other political capital, I think is what they're finding out. And it's got to be frustrating for them because in their own states, that was highly successful. I think the problem with COVID too is we're going on 4 years now or 3.5. It's got some age to it. People are starting to forget a little bit. I just don't think the COVID shtick and that you are strong standing up to the federal government during COVID carries the same type of cachet that it used to.
It doesn't. It's not as salient as it was in the, I would say the months after, in the year and a half after, when it was still at the forefront of our minds, because it was this gradual stepping off that we did, right? I mean, people got vaccinated, things began to open back up, mask mandates started going away, but it was very phased. And so we're completely back to normal now. And so and we have been for a while. So it doesn't carry that cachet anymore. And so it's hard to translate that because people by and large tend to look forward. So what are you going to do for me tomorrow?
Yeah.
How are you going to help me today? And so if you keep going back to COVID and saying, well, this is what I did, like, no, people want to hear what you're going to do, not what you did.
Yeah, I think it's easy to stand up and rail against something that's unpopular. It gets a lot harder when that's not the case. Brandon, as we switch topics here, I think the first thing I have to address with everybody is we're doing this remotely. Typically, we do this in a room together. I had some work schedule stuff today, so we're doing this through remotely. Brandon, you are devastatingly good looking on camera. I mean, look at you, then look at me. Look at this. I'm all grainy and stuff. Look at how good you look. Huh.
I have a good camera, I guess.
Maybe we should go to camera stuff. Probably not. That would ruin everything.
We could do like a special episode every now and then on camera, or like if we kind of went out of the box, or if we had like guests at some point, So,
what do you think of guests? I've thought of that before. We've reached out to some folks, Mike and I did. We were going to try it one time, but just the idea of talking, I don't know, just seems like such a pain in the ass.
It is. Well, yes, it is. So I like the idea, but only if we ensure that it's more of kind of every once in a while. That's not a regular thing, because if it was a frequent thing, I mean, it's a lot of work to prepare, know what you're going to ask them, interview them. I mean, I would not suggest doing it all the time, but maybe like a couple times a year, something like that.
So let's do this. We'll commit to, before the election, we're going to have somebody else on. Somebody from somewhere that can provide some different perspective than ours. Because
good idea.
I mean, today we hit the Stormy Daniels testimony in the Trump trial. I was in the car listening to Fox because, again, there's no reporter in the room. You're just getting tidbits of this. And I mean, there's no other way to say it. They're just slut shaming Stormy Daniels. Hey, I'm not great. She's a porn star. It is what it is. You can think about that any way you want. You're entitled to. I'm not besmirking anybody if they don't like porn stars. That's fine. But at some point, they have to take this woman seriously, and they're going to have to take her testimony seriously. And I think most of her testimony was done today. She survived pretty well on cross-examination. And the main goal of Stormy Daniels was just to remind everybody how gross Trump is.
Yeah. I mean,
she did that.
The defense did not want her to testify, and they interrupted her testimony with objections frequently. And I think the prosecution, when introducing her, attempted to humanize her, and I think that was smart. Her background, her story, growing up in Louisiana, put a face to the name and to the headline and the porn star, image, which comes with a lot of baggage and assumptions by people. But at the end of the day, the prosecution was like, hey, this is somebody not unlike any of us. This is where she came from, to try to show how this all started and where she became caught up in this. It was interesting because there's a lot of chatter that whether or not she was going to testify at all, because her testimony has come so late in the trial. Yeah. But I think by and large, I think that the sequencing of the witnesses has been done very well by the prosecution in terms of who they brought forward. I think, they started with some very, serious, very strong witnesses, especially when you go to like Pecker and then Hope Hicks. These are people that knew Trump personally, that were right there with him, that testified to what they knew. And, for example, with Pecker, they worked out a plea deal, but good for them, because at the end of the day, they got testimony that was very substantial and very damaging to Trump. And so, it's one of those things, again, if we're going to tie this all up, it's difficult to walk away from what we've seen and heard so far, and not think Trump is going to get convicted.
It's really hard to follow this trial, because it really depends on what channel you're watching to what narrative you're getting. And part of the reason why that's possible is it is confusing what's happening. Because if I asked you, Brandon, what is the actual charge? What is the federal charge that Donald Trump is guilty of? I don't 100% think that's been clarified yet.
Yeah, and if you break it down into English, it's falsification of business records. I don't know which statute.
That's the state charge.
That's right. Oh, you're talking about the federal charge, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that I said. I've listened to Andrew McCarthy a lot on this, and he always talks about this is something that is allowed in New York, but they still have not specifically said what the federal charge is. And I guess in New York, they don't have to until they wrap the trial up. So if you listen to Fox will tell you there's a 75% chance the judge, if he were a legitimate judge, which obviously he's not because he's allowing this whole trial to go forward, Fox is setting their people up for, they think after all the testimony, the defense says, hey, we're done because case wasn't proven. And he says, yep, you're right. We're done here. And everybody walks away. I think that's extremely unlikely.
Yeah.
But on the other side, MSNBC has now switched their coverage to talking about prison time and what the punishment is going to be. My point here is it's almost impossible to get just a clear line of sight of what's happening at this trial, because we're not 100% sure what the charges are, and we don't know how one charge links to the other. And I don't know if I'm on the jury, how are these people going to follow that, track all that together? Or are they just defaulting to, I've heard a month's testimony about what a jerk Trump is and how sexually he's a pig, although guilty, and that'll be that, which I think is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah. But I think that's partially it. I don't think there's very little chance he gets jail time out of this.
No.
I think it's likely he gets a conviction of some type. And so it really comes down to what the charges are and how impactful it is at the end of the day. But at the same time, it's interesting because a conviction is a conviction. And there is a subset of Trump's voters who, again, over and over again in polls say that if he is convicted of any federal charge, that they will not support him. I think that's under 10%. But again, in a close election,
I think
every vote makes a difference.
Sarah Longwell from the Bulwark, who does a ton of polling.
Yeah.
Polling. Thank you. I'm just making words up.
Focus
she also
groups.
does a ton of focus group
groups.
stuff
That's
too.
what you're going
There's
for.
A ton of that. And I think she is saying, hey, don't underestimate this conviction. There is that 6 to 10% of Republicans that this represents some sort of line that Trump's going to cross with them. Doesn't mean that they're automatically not going to vote for him, but they are going to take it under consideration. And there's going to be a percentage of people who do not vote for Trump if he is found guilty of this.
That's very true. And it doesn't mean they're going to vote for Biden. But if they don't vote for Trump, that matters in a turnout election. It's all about which side can get their turnout game activated. So that has a huge impact.
My guess is, can this really go on another month? What are we doing? It seems like Cohn testifies after Stormy Daniels, and that's about it. But I think the judge and one of the prosecutors said they expect 4 to 6 weeks more of this trial to last. What are they going to do for 4 to 6? Is this all just technical information and legal information and tracking these payments? Or it seems like that's a long time more for this trial to drag on when it seems like we're down to Michael Cohen.
Yeah, I don't understand. Because Cohen's testimony won't go for that long. So I don't understand what the rest of that time is going to be filled with. Closing arguments usually never take that long.
No. So I don't know if, I have not heard that the defense is planning a multi-week presentation in Trump's defense. I don't even know if they're planning any defense. They'll just run through because Trump just wants to get to Michael Cohen. I think his lawyers, the philosophy is, hey, you're going to lose this case. On appeal is where we're going to try to kind of make our bones here. But if we can damage Michael Cohen in this setting, we can use it in the appellate setting. It feels like that's really the only thing they're going for, is to get this over with, get on record what helps them during this trial, and then get this to the appellate division and kick, scream, holler, stomp your feet, do everything you can to try to get them to pick it up before November. I don't think they will, but that appears to be Trump's only real strategy with this case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they have any other strategy besides that. They know how to play the appeal game, and so they'll go for that. They've really been throwing anything and everything against the wall to see what would stick. Today, with Stormy Daniels' testimony, they made a motion to have the case tossed out, which of course the judge rejected. So I mean, it's just whatever they can do, like they'll try, because that's what they're resorting to at this point, because they really don't have anything else.
I think they said Stormy Daniels' testimony was too prejudicial against Trump or something, because he allowed a little bit more conversation about their relationship, what they did, how they met.
And they wanted to keep all of that out. Yeah.
Which I don't know what that has to do with business records, but I mean, if the judge allows it, the judge allows it. I don't know what their complaints are. And I don't know how much of the Trump's defense complaints are legit and how much they're not. I think that's where the appeal division is going to clear this up.
I don't think, and that would be hard for appeal, because you could argue that, it's not directly relevant to the crime that took place, but Stormy Daniels herself is the object of which the crime was occurred around. It was basically occurred around her. So knowing the background of why they would have gone to that lengths to kill the story, to pay her off, to conceal the payment, all of that, knowing her background and where she enters into this relationship matters. So I don't see that as being the basis for which you could have a valid appeal. More than likely it would have to be some kind of mistake at trial, some type of Cohen would seem like the more legitimate place. I'm
assuming the appeals division is going to have an opinion about this bootstrapping a state charge into a federal charge. I saw some tweet the other day that New York in the last 5 years or something has done this like 10,000 times, where they've charged people with federal crimes based off a state, that this isn't as novel as everybody has said. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think I'm correct in that appellate courts, they do not take up issues of fact. That's all for the trial court. They don't retry and redo the facts. Like you said, they're looking for mistakes in procedure, mistakes in law, misinterpretation of things. And it feels like this case is going to have just a mountain of that stuff for them to chew on.
But like you said, that would take a long time to work its way through. That's not going to happen before the election.
No. Did you see Cannon came out today in Florida and indefinite hold on the trial down there? They have so many issues to go through with deciding what documents are in, how to view these documents. Trump's lawyers, of course, have come back and said this is impossible for us to work through. And Cannon just threw her hands up and said, all trial dates are out, trial suspended indefinitely. As we chew through these, we'll get closer.
Yeah, I just heard about that. Is there anything that Jack Smith can do to appeal that, or?
He can't appeal that, but so Jack Smith has a decision to make, in my opinion. He could get both the January 6th case and the documents case to trial before the election if he chooses to. The choice he has to make is he has to drop half the case. For example, in the documents case in Florida, throw all the document stuff away, get rid of all of that, charge him with obstruction, take him to trial, find him guilty.
Interesting. Okay.
Same thing with the January 6th case. Take all in the January 6th case, when I think it was Alito was talking with one of the government's lawyers, Alito seemed very hip to the idea that there are private acts and there are not public. There acts as a private citizen and acts as a president. And the lawyers went back and forth, and Alito kind of already indicated, okay, I would see these as private. These are the things that we're talking about, if they're covered by immunity or not. Okay, fine. Take those things that are in question, throw those out, and just charge Trump with the private acts he did, which is, again, defrauding the government and obstruction. So in some ways, for everybody out there bitching that, this looks bad on the courts, this isn't how this works, how can we believe in justice when blah, blah, blah? Part of this is on Jack Smith. This is the route Smith chose to go. And he might have gone this route because he knew, hey, I'm going to start off at the kitchen sink. And as everybody gets their whack at this, I may have to pare this down. I don't know if this is something he would do going forward. It would certainly change, I think, the depth of the outcome. But if the goal is to get this wrapped up before the election, because you want the people of the United States to have some facts about Trump's legal cases and some conclusions to them before they vote, there is a path that we can do that. It's just, is that what we want to do? And yes, this whole theory means Trump skates on most of the heavy stuff.
Yeah, but which is a little bit difficult to.
It's hard to swallow.
Yeah.
But do you want him convicted of something before the election? There are paths to do it. You just got to skinny it down.
And the January 6th case is a little bit different because it's the different judge there who Judge Cannon, I think, is a sympathetic judge to Trump and has kind of delayed this trial from the very get-go. A lot of questionable decisions going back to the hearings and trying to appoint a special master, which of course she was overruled on. I think that as soon as the Supreme Court decision comes down, whenever that is, which June would be the latest, but that could come down really any day, then Judge Chutkan in D.C. will be immediately, okay, let's schedule this. Let's get this on the docket. Regardless of what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court, Judge Cannon is going to move slowly. Yeah. But if you're going to focus your efforts on reducing the charges, it would be in her venue, because I think that does put her on the defense in terms of like then acting to actually schedule a trial in a reasonable time frame. Because if she still is going to say this is indefinite, again, I think that just bolsters Jack's case that you really need a change of judge. There's all of these small things that have been adding up with Judge Cannon that are questionable, to say the least.
And I know this is shitty. I've said this before, and I admit this is shitty. Leak all the other stuff. I mean, in the J6 case, get the easy conviction for obstruction and interfering with a political process, which should be no-brainers. Leak all the rest of it. I mean, if your goal is to, again, I'm putting the most generous spin on Jack Smith. If his goal is, he has the white knight goal of educating the American people on what really happened so that we can make an informed choice on Donald Trump on November 5th, there are ways to do that outside of court. It just depends on, is that what you want to do? Yeah. And I don't know if he does. I've got no indication that that's what he's going to do. But there's ways that you can get skinnier and you can get this. You can get convictions if you want. You're just leaving tons of meat on the bone.
That's a good point. So yeah, he has some, I think, big decisions to make in the weeks ahead. That's for sure.
Okay, so Brandon, you are the decider. You are George Bush in this one. So you're Jack Smith's boss. This is your call. We could do the full Monty, which I certainly believe is relevant, specific to Jan 6. And certainly the documents case. Those are cases that deserve to get all the attention, all the facts, the entire process laid out before the American people. It's not going to happen. And if we don't do this on the 5th of November, it's a good shot we don't do it at all. Brandon, what are you telling Jack Smith?
Well, I think I
make the call.
Yeah, I would make the call to pare down the documents case. because it's a huge gamble there, because that case completely goes away, obviously, as Trump wins. If he wins, the other one does too. But it's also a huge gamble because if he doesn't do something there, there's not going to be any movement before the election at all.
No.
I mean, an indefinite hold on the case, I mean, that's about as bad news as you can get, with a judge who was appointed by Trump, who has been nothing but very oddly supportive of the defense's arguments. With the Judge Chutkan case, I would wait until the DC or the Supreme Court decision comes out and how quickly Judge Chutkan moves to put that case back on the docket, back up your timeline from there, and then make a decision on whether or not to pare that case down as well.
But the Supreme Court could shit on that one as well. All they have to do is say these things are still questions of fact about what Trump's immune for and what he's not, and send it back to the appellate court. I mean, they can basically say, we don't have enough information to understand if these things are private acts or if they're acts as a president. They can put all of this back to the lower court to go through the motions, hear everything, and do it again for more information. If they do that, that's punting the case.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court can absolutely spike the January 6th case if they want to.
Oh, they can, yeah. So, I mean, it really depends on what they decide to do, what this decision comes down from them. I mean, they can punt it, they can send it back to the lower court, they can issue a very broad ruling, they can issue a very specific ruling. It's hard to tell, and I think it's even more up in the air based on the arguments we heard a couple weeks ago to understand what direction they're going in. I would have, if I were advising Jack, I would have a couple of different plans in place depending on how the court rules, and be ready to just go with which plan you have based on the Supreme Court ruling. And that's, but he needs to have those in hand.
I think it's time for Jack Smith to start coming up with some alternate plans. And I think it's time for people. I still get people occasionally will text me something, and there's still this expectation that one thing is going to stop Trump. That's not the way this works.
No, it's not. But
he's not going to jail.
He's not going to jail. I do have a lot of frustration, though, when it comes down to the J6 case specifically, because this all goes back. If Merrick Garland had been more aggressive in pursuing this case immediately, and instead he waited and held off for so long, and the thought process is that he held off because he didn't want his office to be accused of looking like it was political. Sure. He was trying to keep distance with the politics.
How's that gone?
Right. How's that exactly? And so, but in the process, he bought all of this extra time for Trump. And so now it's a race against the clock, and Trump is doing what he's good at doing, which is outmaneuvering in terms of delays, appeals, and again, we might not be in this scenario where we would be facing a delay of the type that would move this after the election. If the Justice Department had started to build that case on January 7th, hadn't started immediately, but they did not. I mean, they waited so long, and that part is frustrating to me because that didn't need to happen. That part I think was unnecessary. But hey, we're here now, and it goes back. I do think Merrick Garland was not probably the best appointment for the DOJ. I think he needed somebody in that role who was at least a little bit more of an attack dog. Yeah. I mean, Garland is cautious, and I appreciate that he cares about norms, but he may do so to his detriment and to the country's detriment, but to a degree that nobody else does. I mean, with the Biden case, he appointed specifically a Republican prosecutor to oversee Biden's document case, again, to try to keep that political separation. But the other side doesn't do that. I mean, if the shoe were on the other foot, it would have been, it would be Republican prosecutors no matter what. There would have been this like, okay, let's appoint somebody from the other side. Let's, try to show balance. Let's try to show neutrality. Well, I don't know what that buys you at the end of the day.
It's bought him nothing. What if January 7th, they would have started investigating Trump for obstructing a political process? And on January 21st, they impaneled a grand jury. And on February 15th, because this is a simple one, they issued the indictment, we would have had that done by now.
Wow. Yeah.
And if there was a path for something else, they could always go back and recharge him.
Yeah. We had no movement in 2021. We had no movement in 2022. We had 2 lost years, essentially.
If I'm Jack Smith's boss, I'm like, I'm with you. I support you. You got to do what you got to do. But just remember, you're asking a lot of people who wear robes to do a lot of things they've never done before. That's not what people in robes do. So there's going to be some limitations to what you're going to be able to do. And yes, while Trump is Trump, I mean, Trump still wields his base of power. So I think it's time for Jack Smith to say what really is important to get out of this and maybe make some adjustments moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's at the moment of truth where he has to make some hard decisions, and it's going to be a matter of if you want to see progress and potential charges before November, or really gamble with Trump winning the election and all of this falls apart, which would be the worst case scenario.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Brandon, I was watching Trump the other day come out of court and start rambling, and I'm like, are we in a presidential campaign? Is that what this is? Is this what this campaign's just going to look like? Because what Biden is occasionally venturing to Philadelphia, North Carolina, I've heard his staff has said he's going to start doing less. I don't know how. Trump comes out and incoherently babbles a little bit in front of the courthouse. Is this a presidential campaign? Is this what it is?
It's bizarre that this is what passes for a presidential campaign now. I mean,
is this going to stop and the real campaign is going to start at some point? What does that look like? I
don't know. That's a good question. When it actually, I mean, Trump is hampered by the fact that he has to spend most of his time in a courthouse. So his campaigning is literally, like you said, from the courthouse steps. I mean, it's this inarticulate, babbling, this regurgitation of grievances, sometimes, sporting printed copies of opinion pieces that are, about him being a victim.
Off a web page.
So that's his aspect of campaigning. Biden has started to campaign a little bit more. He's going to have to get more aggressive, obviously. Like we've said that over and over again, but he's going to have to be everywhere and have a much more robust travel schedule. The real interesting question that's come up is debates, and what the debates look like, and whether or not Trump is challenging his campaign, challenging Biden to hold all of these extraneous debates outside of the normal debate schedule in the fall, like to start debating now, which is ridiculous.
Brandon, simple question, yes, no answer, only accepted. Are the presidential debates still relevant?
No, I don't think so. I think they've lost their relevance. They've been losing for a while, especially as we get into digital age and voting starts occurring well into beginning of October. But especially what we saw in 2016 and then 2020, the 2020 debates were awful because Trump does not debate. There was no controlling him. The moderators lost control. I mean, they had to turn off his microphone eventually. Like, that was not a debate. It was, most people were exhausted watching it. They were disgusted. Like, we're going to have 3 of those. It's like, give me a break.
There's no way.
Why even commit? If I'm Biden's team, why commit to debate Trump when Trump refused to debate any of his primary opponents? And it didn't make a difference for him at all. He still won the primary handily. I mean, this is a guy who didn't want to debate, where he had the most to lose, and now he's apparently wanting to debate. But it's difficult to debate with somebody. I think if you're going to have a political debate, you have to have agreed upon norms, and you have to accept those norms.
Yeah.
And Trump has never accepted that. Like, I would say, like, a number one prerequisite, which Trump has refused to accept, is, will you accept the outcome of the election, even if you don't win? And we know that's not the case with Trump.
Speaking of that, did you see Tim Scott this weekend?
We didn't talk about, Meet the Press. Again, BP's audition sweepstakes. But that was so exhausting and frustrating to watch. I mean, he refused to say that he would abide and accept the results of the election, and kept pivoting away from that. And just kept saying Trump will be the president. Like, I mean, we're really at the moment where we have U.S. senators who refuse to acknowledge the validity of our elections and are basically just, delegitimizing our entire system. I mean, that's what that is. I mean, if you're not going to agree to accept the result of the election, you're not agreeing to accept the Constitution. You're not agreeing to accept the whole premise of how our democracy works. I mean, that.
So, but what I can't understand is, okay, is this a 100% play for the VP?
Oh yeah,
it's VP
he's playing to an audience of one.
Tim
That's
Scott.
all it
okay.
is. Yeah.
So Tim Scott's what, 50-ish? Let's say he's around 50. I mean, congratulations, he's married his mystery girlfriend from Canada. Apparently, they're getting married.
We'll see how long that lasts. Yeah.
Brandon, has Tim Scott just made the calculation of, hey, this is it. I'm shooting my wad. I'm going for broke. I mean, I guess he's tired of being a senator. I don't know why. He never really does anything. He hasn't sponsored any legislation. He's fairly inactive in the U.S. Senate. Is he saying this is my go for broke moment, and come hell or high water, I'm getting into the executive branch?
I think he is. I think he is willing to put his entire reputation and his legacy on the line for it because he wants power and he's looking at the next stage of that. And so that's all it is. And you have to be mindful too that when these guys go on the Sunday morning shows, they're definitely playing into an audience of one with this kind of rhetoric because Trump isn't online. Trump is not known for being on the internet, but he does watch a lot of TV. And he watches a lot of Fox News. He watches all the Sunday morning shows. He's old school when it comes to how he gets his news. And he has TVs on 24/7, multiple from what people have said. And so, they know how to reach Trump. And this is the way that they're doing it. And so that's what's happening. To a lesser degree, Rubio is in the same boat because he's going all in for the VP slot as well, and he's been on a lot of these shows.
Let me lead into Rubio a little bit, just because at one point he was your Republican standard bearer. He was the guy that was going to move the party forward, and boy, is he disappointed.
Well, and I had the opportunity. I actually met Rubio when he was campaigning in Kansas City ahead of the.
You picked him up at the airport, didn't you?
I did. I drove a large vehicle, picked him up from the airport, blacked out tinted windows, drove him to the event. Actually got to speak with him quite a bit in the car. I mean, disappointment is probably an understatement. Like, he has just capitulated and become a completely different person. And maybe he was that person all along and, it was just a quest for power, but it's been so disgusting to see on display. I mean, Rubio was someone who fashioned himself as a foreign policy,
a serious
person in foreign policy. And here he was one of the no votes against the Ukraine and Israel aid. I mean, it's remarkable how far he's fallen. But that's interesting with Rubio as VP. He'd have to change his residency because you can't have a VP.
Which he said he was willing to do.
Which is,
Brandon, what would he have done if Senator Rubio got into the blackout van that day, looked at you and said, "Where's the best Coke in Kansas City?"
I don't even know how I'd respond to that. Yeah.
I bet somebody who's picked up a senator before for a trip has had to deal with that question before.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of stories, like confidential
stories. I think Marco has just made the calculation. This is the year to be VP, because if Trump should happen to win, there's no possible way he's doing 4 years. No. It is the potential easiest path to the presidency could be Trump's VP. Now, Trump could burn it all down before they get that chance. But if I'm his VP, I'm going to assume that I'm gonna be president within 4 years. There's no way he makes it 4 years in the office, physically, mentally, legally. I just don't think it happens.
Yeah, I don't think that's likely at all. I think that's definitely the calculus there, and with many of the others as well, is that they are going to be able to assume the presidency much quicker than they would in any other circumstance. So they're willing to sell themselves out to do so. And, there's not too high of a price in any event. And so that's what we're seeing with Rubio, and Tim Scott, and the rest. We already saw that with Elise. Elise Stefanik is unlikely to be chosen because she is she's salivating, at the bit to be able to be Trump's VP, and she looks too desperate. So there's a fine line between like sucking up to the boss and doing everything that the boss wants you to do, and then just being like sheer desperation to the point where it becomes a turnoff. And I think that's the problem Elise Stefanik's going to have is.
Didn't they teach you in like political school? Desperation kills you. Nobody votes for a desperate candidate. No. Brandon, I can tell you still work and you do a lot of like video calls during the day. Your head's like perfectly still. You don't bob around as if I'm over here just constantly out of frame, this or that. I can tell that you do this much, much more.
I do a lot of video calls in the course of a day.
How many hours a week do you spend in this exact setup? Sitting there, looking at the screen, some joker on the other half spot. Is this work a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really what work is now, at least a good, 20 to 25 hours out of the week. Although I'm always trying to like balance that and to like remove unnecessary video calls off my calendar and unnecessary meetings. It's a never ending project. It's like a new meeting gets added, another meeting gets added. And then I'm constantly trying to just block like actual time off to think and to work, because I mean, that gets consumed pretty quickly.
I think a couple podcasts ago, I told people that if you have like one reoccurring meeting a day, you should quit. I think I stand by that. That seems like a good number.
I think that is a good number. I mean, former roles, I've even had more meetings than I do now, which was I got to the point where I was just like, I can't do this. It's crazy. But there is something to be said. I don't know the state of work today, because when we go back, I mean, when I go back to like early on in my career, like starting out, like it wasn't this way where it was meeting after meeting after meeting. Like meetings were strategic and they had a purpose, and you would actually meet to accomplish something, and there was known goals coming out of the meeting. Now there's all, like you said, there's all of these reoccurring placeholder meetings that are just there and then never go away, and that you, many cases, don't get anything out of them, but we have to have them on the calendar for whatever reason. And
I'm old enough to remember at Sprint, Brandon, we had planning meetings with like senior folks, and we literally sat at the kids' table. There were 2 tables in the meeting, and then people sat around the walls, not at the table, because you were there only to and pointed to spit out one fact that somebody needed, and that was it.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat in many, many meetings where it's like, we don't want you here. You're not needed here. You have one thing to say it one way, and then get out as soon as you're done. Do you think younger folks would appreciate going to a meeting where the senior VP just tells people, these people are at the kids' table, we'll call on them when needed, basically ignore them, and let's let the adults move forward here?
Yeah, I don't think that would fly for very long. I think with the next generation, I don't think they have the patience for that. It's a key difference. I do have a funny story. I had a former colleague of mine who was in a role working remotely where a senior leader of the organization, basically an autonomous unit within the organization, said, "Hey, I need you to fly out." This was on a Sunday. Fly out tomorrow and to Nashville to answer questions before a large group of people on your expertise on things, some projects. So she scrambled to do that, arrived, and then found out, like, had to book a hotel stay and all this, and then got to the meeting and was told by that same person, change of plans, you don't need to say anything, so just listen. So she flew all the way out there, like, and scrambled to make plans just to listen and then to go back.
Well, I told that guy, another change of plan, I'm leaving. I came down here because you told me to. Yeah, I'm leaving.
And I'm like, I'd be like, what, really?
Yeah. Let's end with Marjorie Taylor Greene went on Steve Bannon's podcast, which, by the way, once a week, you should listen to Steve Bannon's podcast. It is utter insanity. But she went on there bitching that Fox called her an idiot. Fox ran an opinion piece by somebody called Marjorie Taylor Greene's an idiot. They had several guests on telling everybody Marjorie Taylor Greene's an idiot. And she really, really was upset by this. I know MTG had a little press conference today where she said she was now going to handle Mike Johnson's resignation in private, and that she, Massey, and a group of other folks were going to talk to Johnson, I believe, today with the goal of getting him to resign. And if he wouldn't resign, they would talk about next steps to to oust him. Is the motion to vacate officially done? That's not going to happen, is it?
I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, Trump basically told her to stop for Republican unity. So I don't know that that's going to happen. They can keep maneuvering and trying. I mean, Johnson isn't going to resign, so that's not likely. But again, when you're dealing with a 2-seat majority, which I think is where they're at now, they could be down to 1 seat before the end of the year. These people can cause a nuisance, though, and they probably will continue to do so in many ways. But no, I don't think it's likely. They'll continue being nuisance.
They're going to make his job as hard as they can. Yeah. I did what I did with. They did pass. The House managed to get its act together enough to pass H.R. 6090. This is the bill you may have heard of. That's the anti-Semitism bill. This is the Republicans' attempt to continually to cash in on the unrest on campuses and the general unpopularity of the college kids' protest these days. We talked about this last week. We think those protests are way out of bounds, that the kids are off in the weeds, but they'll get themselves back to where they need to be. And to help that, the House passes H.R. 6090. This is a joke of a bill. It's completely vague. It's unenforceable. Basically, what they did is they took Section 6 of the Civil Rights Act that basically said you can't, any institution that gets federal money, you can't discriminate against race. They're basically trying to extend that to include religion now, and specifically Jews. And the main rub of the problem with this bill is, Brandon, what's the definition of anti-Semitism? I've heard many definitions based on who you ask. For this, the purpose of this bill, they use the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition from anti-Semitism. And this is where that definition includes things like, hey, you can't say Jews killed Jesus. You can't compare Israel to Nazis. You can't criticize Israel for doing things that other democratic countries do. This is an awful bill. It's a waste of time. It's something I would expect out of a Democrat, not a Republican. This is a messaging bill that you don't like anti-Semitism.
That's what I was just going to say, messaging bill. Or, I mean, it's really a performative bill, but it has real-world repercussions and impact.
This will never pass the Senate, but it's just another indication that in a Congress filled of do-nothing performers, there is no topic that they won't try to perform on. I thought this bill was a complete waste of time, made the Republicans look absolutely silly, and I hope this thing dies in the Senate.
Well, and I mean, the legitimate freedom of speech issues are the main thing, but also, I mean, how do you carve out these restrictions just on this one topic, anti-Semitism, and on nothing else? I mean, it seems completely subjective, which it is. There's a lot of ambiguity in it, which opens up the door to a lot of potential abuse beyond the abuse that would occur with just how it's written. But yeah, it's not going to live up to the light of day. But as you said, it's all about trying to capitalize on the protests and trying to use them for political advantage. And so that's what they're attempting to do, milk everything they can out of it, which is just,
I just, anytime somebody makes a law and it specifically references religious documents, like you cannot say, Christians killed Christ, or Jews killed Christ, that really should be, the House should really, and the Senate should really think about what they're doing before they pass bills like this. Any bill that curtails religious activity, religious speech, or ties, you can't say anything bad about this particular religious group, really needs to be kind of thought about, double thought, rethought, and considered before we do it. And I thought this was just an example of completely unnecessary trying to kind of latch on to something that's happening culturally today. And I just thought it was just a gross thing to do by the Republicans.
Oh, I completely agree. They definitely didn't do their due diligence. Before we end, I did want to just revisit, I talked about that Time interview with Trump. It wasn't recorded, which is disappointing. So it's not on audio or video. It was a written interview. It's over 3 hours, basically, to read, or to if you have it transcribed. But there are a couple of key moments. So I alluded to one of the most egregious, where he basically said that he refused to put down calls for violence if he were to lose, and said that whether or not he supported violence, essentially, to paraphrase, would be dependent upon whether or not it was a fair election, which again should be earth-shattering, but it got very little attention, almost no attention, when you have a major party candidate, former president, refusing to denounce violence that could take place on his behalf, and insinuating that he might even encourage it. And then second, that he said, when he was asked about comments that he made about suspending the Constitution and wanting to be dictator for a day, and what that says about him and what he thinks about America, he said, quote, maybe the people want that, which I think was also just a striking acknowledgement from a former president as well, maybe a future president, to say that maybe the people want autocracy. So I think, again, those got very little play, but that should be a media talking point from here until the election. Yeah.
So, Brandon, what I hear you saying is it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And for better time, we can't even. It's pointless to even try to point to when the get better period is going to start, because it's not going to be for a while.
We haven't hit bottom yet, so
we have not. Unfortunately, we have not toed the bottom yet. Brendan, I don't know how long this recording gives us. The software gives us, so we're at an hour. We'll call it there. That's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com, or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.